I took the same bus home every night for 8 months. And somewhere around month 3, I realized something on that bus had been watching me the entire time and taking notes. And the worst part, the part that still keeps me awake, is that when I found those notes, the most recent entry was from 3 nights before I found them. And it described exactly what I was doing at that moment, sitting alone on that bus reading it. The route was the 44. And it ran from the industrial district on the east side of the city through 6 stops before it reached my apartment complex, and the last bus left at 3:07 in the morning, which sounds specific enough to be comforting until you realize that specificity was exactly what made everything wrong. I worked the overnight shift at a logistics warehouse back then, and the commute home was just part of the job. Something you stop thinking about after a few weeks, just a ritual. Climb on, sit down, get off, go to bed. Except in 8 months of riding that route, I never once saw the same driver twice, which I told myself was just how overnight staffing worked. Rotating schedules, different people on different nights. Nothing unusual about that, and I kept telling myself that right up until the night I understood that the drivers weren't just different people, they were different in a way I still don't have a clean word for. The first thing that happens when you take the same route long enough is you learn its rhythm, the specific way the bus slows. Before a stop, even when no one has pulled the cord, the particular groan the doors make in cold weather, the exact number of seconds the driver waits before pulling back into the road, and once you've absorbed that rhythm into your bones, you feel it immediately when something breaks the pattern, even if you can't name what, even if every rational part of your brain is trying to convince you that you're just tired, that it's almost 4 in the morning and you've been on your feet for 8 hours, and your perception simply cannot be trusted right now. Which is a very reasonable thing to tell yourself, right up until the bus rolls past your stop, without slowing down. That happened on a Tuesday in late October, and I remember pulling the cord twice, standing up, walking to the front, saying excuse me to the driver, who was a heavy-set man in the standard gray uniform with his hat pulled low over his face, and he didn't turn around. Just said the next stop is coming up in a moment, in a voice that was perfectly even, no irritation, no apology, just flat assurance. And I sat back down because what else do you do at 3 in the morning on a bus that hasn't decided to let you off yet? The next stop came about 2 minutes later, and the doors opened and the air outside was the same cold October air it always was, and I stepped off. And I was 4 blocks further from my apartment than I should have been, which was irritating, but not frightening. Not yet, because I told myself he'd just missed my stop. Drivers make mistakes. It was the middle of the night, and I pulled my jacket tighter and walked home in the dark and went to bed and didn't think about it again for nearly 2 weeks. The second time, something went wrong. The bus arrived at my stop 7 minutes early. I know it was early because I had checked my phone at the warehouse right before I left, and I walked to the stop, the way I always did, same route, same pace, 9 minutes exactly, and the bus was already there, just sitting with its doors open and its engine running, and I stood on the pavement for a second, just looking at it, because in 8 months, that bus had never been early, not once, not by a single minute. And then I climbed on because I was tired and cold, and it was right there. And when I sat down, I had a text from my coworker Daria that said, "Hey, did you already leave? I was going to ask if you wanted to walk to the stop together." Sent 4 minutes before I got on, and I looked out the window as the bus pulled away. And Daria was standing at the stop behind us, just arrived, looking down at her phone, and I watched her get smaller through the back glass until the bus turned and she disappeared. I texted her and said, "Sorry, I just caught it early." And she said, "That's weird. I must have just missed it." And I said, "Yeah, must have." And we both let it go the way you let things go at 3 a.m. when the alternative is sitting with something you don't understand. What I didn't tell Daria, what I didn't tell anyone for a long time, was that when I boarded that bus that night, the interior felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain, not visually wrong. The seats were the same, the fluorescent lights were the same, the rubber floor was the same, but the smell was gone. And I know that sounds like nothing but buses have a smell. Rubber and recycled air, and sometimes old food, and sometimes something worse. They always have a smell, and this bus smelled like nothing at all, like a space that had been sealed and held and made ready, and the driver didn't acknowledge me when I got on, didn't glance up in the mirror the way every driver does when someone boards, just sat completely still with both hands on the wheel until I swiped my card, and then the doors closed and we moved. And every stop we passed was empty, nobody waiting, nobody getting on. Just the orange cones of street light and the silence, which wasn't unusual for that hour, but felt different that night. Felt arranged, like the emptiness had been prepared. I started keeping notes after that. Nothing elaborate, just a running log in my phone. The time the bus arrived, which stop I got off at, anything that seemed out of place. And for 3 weeks, there was nothing to write down. The rides were uneventful. The drivers were indifferent in the ordinary way. Everything was normal, and I almost deleted the whole thing. And then I noticed the man at the 4th stop. He was there every night. Not most nights, not frequently, every single night, standing at the 4th stop in a dark coat with his hands in his pockets. And he never got on the bus. The doors would open, the driver would hold for the standard count of seconds, the doors would close, the bus would move, and the man would stay on the pavement and watch us pull away. And I started watching for him the way you watch for a familiar landmark on a long drive. And for a while, that's genuinely all he was. Just a man who stood at a bus stop in the middle of the night, maybe waiting for a different route. Maybe he just liked the night air. There are innocent explanations for everything if you need them badly enough. The night I stopped being able to use those explanations was a night I was the only passenger on the bus. And I was watching for him at the 4th stop, and he was there, same dark coat, same posture, same hands in pockets. And the doors opened, and he didn't move to get on. And then right as the doors started to close, he looked up directly at the window where I was sitting. And I cannot explain how he found it so fast. I don't know how he knew which window I was behind without any searching, but his eyes went straight to me with no hesitation, and he just looked. No expression I could name, not menacing, not curious, just aware. The way something looks at you when it has always known exactly where you are. And the doors closed and the bus moved. And I turned and watched him through the back window, and he was still looking, rotating slightly to keep his eyes on the bus. And then we went around a corner and he was gone. I wrote it all down, right there in my seat, with my hands not quite steady, because I knew. Not suspected, not feared, knew that I was not going to find an innocent explanation for that one. I started sitting in different seats. After that night, rotating, front one night, middle the next, thinking on some level that I was testing something, and he still found my window every single time, every 4th stop. Doors open, eyes up, straight to wherever I was sitting, no searching, no adjustment. And after the 4th time, I stopped changing seats because there was clearly no point. I asked Daria at work one evening, keeping it casual, whether she had ever noticed a man standing at the fourth stop, dark coat, just there every night. And she thought about it and said she usually fell asleep somewhere around the third stop and didn't really surface until her stop near the end of the route, so she had never seen him. And I said, "Oh, right, that makes sense," and changed the subject. And I have thought many times since then about how lucky that was for her. The detail that stays with me more than the man, the thing I come back to more often, is something I noticed on a Wednesday about 2 months into keeping the notes. When I got on the bus and sat down, and about 60 seconds into the ride, I became aware of a sound, very faint, coming from the front of the bus, from the driver. And it took me several minutes to understand what I was hearing, because the engine noise covered most of it, and my brain kept trying to file it as something else. But eventually I understood that the driver was talking barely above a breath, continuously, not in response to anything, not pausing, just a constant low murmur that had apparently been going on since before I got on. And I slid forward a few rows as quietly as I could, and I still couldn't make out any words, just the sound of something being said over and over. And at one point, the driver shifted in his seat, and the rear view mirror caught the overhead light differently, and I could see the lower half of his face, and his lips were moving steadily. But his expression was completely neutral, not reciting, not praying, just running, the way a machine runs a process that has nothing to do with the people around it. And I moved back to my seat and sat with my hands in my lap and rode the rest of the way in silence that was not actually silence at all. The notes are the last thing I want to tell you about, because the notes are the reason I never took that bus again. I had been logging entries for roughly 3 months by this point, several pages of them, and one night I was going back through the whole record looking for patterns, and I found entries I had not written, not entries I had forgotten, not entries that seemed different in hindsight, entries that were wrong in their phrasing and wrong in their detail, but written in my exact shorthand, in my format, describing nights I had been on the bus and things I had not noticed and had not recorded, noting the temperature inside the bus and the light level and the number of other passengers, and in one entry a description of me, what I was wearing, where I was sitting, what I was doing with my hands, written in the same flat informational tone as everything else in the log. And the most recent of these foreign entries, dated 3 nights before I found them, said only that the subject appeared to be reviewing previous entries and that the observation would be logged accordingly. I deleted the app that night. I switched to a different route the next morning, one that added 40 minutes each way to my commute. And I never took the 44 again, and most of the time that's enough. Most days I can close a door on it and leave it there and convince myself it was the accumulated strangeness of working nights for too long. Pattern recognition running hot in an exhausted brain. And then there are the other nights, the ones where I lie in the dark and think about that last entry and what it means that something had been watching me carefully enough and long enough to document not just what I was doing, but what I was thinking. And I think about whether whatever was keeping that record is keeping it still in some form I will never be able to find. And I think about the man at the 4th stop, whether he is still there right now in the streetlight with his hands in his pockets, watching the bus pull away. And I think about how I used to believe that leaving the route was the thing that made me safe, and I think about how the only real difference between then and now is that then I was on the bus and now I am here, lying still in the dark, and I cannot tell you honestly, I cannot tell you with any certainty at all which of those two situations is actually the safer one.